Low, pearly light slides across a chain of shallow seas, turning their surfaces to brushed metal. Mist threads through fern prairies in long ribbons, catching on the dark teeth of conifers and loosening into dew. The distant surf on chalky shores sounds like a slow exhale, a steady hush that rises and falls as if the planet itself were sleeping. The morning chorus is already alive, a steady fabric of clicks, trills, and soft wing beats, stitched so tightly that silence has to stand at the edge and listen in. The air tastes salt-sweet. Reason rides the breeze. Droplets bead on fronds and roll to the tips like tiny glass marbles before falling into prints left in the damp, carbonate sand. Hold for a moment on the water's skin. You would see early foragers at the edge, sleek bodies cutting small wakes, long snouts testing the brackish shallows. Every ripple writes a brief sentence that predators can read from the sky. Then a moving eclipse. A dark shape slides over the lagoon, not quite touching the world beneath it, just dimming it. Fish tighten into a silver knot. The knot flickers, breaks, tightens again. Calm above, crisis below. That is the curve of this hour dot at first glance. The scene looks peaceful, almost tender. But look longer and a second layer appears. The sky is not empty space. It is a living medium braided with gradients. Heat rises from sun-soaked rock and paints invisible spirals ladders for those who know how to climb them. Pressure pools low over cool water and draws a soft, steady breeze from the dunes. Humidity hangs heavier in hollows and carries scent farther along the ground than up through the trees. To a winged hunter, this is not just scenery. It is a map with currents for roads, updrafts for stairs, and smell for signposts. Standard science speaks of inland seaways that split continents, turning prairies into coasts and coasts into labyrinths of bays. Warm, shallow water met rich plankton blooms. Rich blooms meant fish. Fish meant a reliable larder. Some researchers suggest the air itself held slightly different ratios than today, perhaps a touch more oxygen, a touch more heat enough to make lift cheaper, glides longer, landings softer. Others argue the composition was closer to modern, with the magic coming not from chemistry, but from temperature and topography. Hot flats feeding thermals, steep bluffs converting winds into elevators, tidal flats resetting the buffet twice a day. Either way, the effect is the same on a quiet morning like this. Even stillness is organized. Even rest has a direction. Not everyone agrees on the story. On the fringes, you find ideas of a thicker sky, a world in which air pressure itself was higher, giving great flyers a gentler world to push against. There are also legends told much later by human mouths, tales of sky snakes riding stormbacks, of feathered spirits that drink wind. Those stories are not field notes, but their shapes rhyme with what the fossils say. Crests like banners, membranes like sails, cliffs drilled with ledges, each a doorway into a generation's hope. Your ear would catch detail after detail. The dry crackle of frond tips where dew has already burned off. The soft patter of drops falling from conifer needles to chalk, leaving darker coin-sized stains that vanish as the surface drinks. The flit of small feathered bodies in the understory, stitching branch to branch, making their own lanes under the larger traffic above. Add the scent notes, a faint metal hint from the sea, the warm sugar of pollen, a trace of fish from the shallows, Thin as thread, but strong enough to pull hunters from far away. The air lanes no one can see are not random. Below the cliff line, stones warmed by early sun release columns of lift. Over the lagoon, air is cooler and heavier, flowing outward like a slow river that never shows a ripple. Along the edge, where hot and cool meet, the two bodies of air shear and fold into each other, carving a boundary zone where experienced wings can hang almost without effort. A master of this sky glides to the seam, tucks a little, slides sideways, and lets rising air do the heavy work. The loop repeats from headland to headland, bay to bay, all morning long. Below, habits also follow patterns. Mud flats open at low tide and broadcast a quiet invitation to everything with a beak. Crabs scuttle in grooves that yesterday's water left behind. Soft-bellied creatures hunt in the damp sand for smaller lives that hid there when light returned. Fish crowd the channels that remain, thinking they are safe until a beak skims the surface like a black blade. The line between water and air, between hunter and hunted, is only the thickness of a thought. Myth would paint this dawn in colors of omen-crested lords, tracing laws in the sky, each spiral a sentence about power and grace. Orthodoxy lowers the brush and writes in smaller letters, body plans tuned by millions of years, landscapes that make lift abundant, oceans that feed the food that feeds the flyers. Both ways of seeing carry a kind of truth. One teaches you reverence. The other teaches you where to stand if you want to watch the best show. As the sun climbs, the thermals fatten. The horizon wavers. The chalk shines harder, almost too bright. The chorus of insects never stops. It shifts key. Air near the ground starts to quiver in little dancing streams you can only see if you squint. Tracks appear on the beach as if they rose from underneath rather than pressed from above each step, already half erased by the tiny tide of dew, then preserved in powder as the surface dries. A long crest cuts the air 100 feet up, then a second follows, then a third, each choosing a slightly different spiral, as if 3 sentences were being written on the same page but in 3 hands. If you slow your breath and let the day settle in your chest, you can feel how many quiet contests are underway at once. Hunger against caution, weight against lift, heat against water. Every small decision turn now. Wait 1 more second, climb here, cross there, adds up over lives and seasons to a line that either continues or ends. The calm is not a lie. It is the mask of a complex play, one that moves too smoothly to show you the effort in the actors' bodies. There is a mystery inside this calm, not a riddle to answer in a sentence, but a question to live inside, which invisible gradients, braided and unbraided by the sun, minute by minute, choose winners and set limits here. Heat lines, scent plumes, tiny hills of pressure rising and falling. What hands do they lay on wings and water to decide who eats, who thrives, who vanishes? And if those hands shift even slightly, what else will the morning become? The day has brightened, but the sky still holds a softness that smooths every edge. A continuous tone rises from the fern fields, a long metallic hum woven from 1,000 small lives rubbing parts together. As wind slides through conifer crowns, it carries that sound in slow waves, bending it, thickening it, thinning it. The air feels warm and a little heavy, like a shawl laid across your shoulders. Each breath settles deeper than you expect. Above the tree line, heat shimmers like clear water tipped from an invisible bowl. You would notice how sound behaves here. The insect choir rides just over the ground, then fades quickly above head height, as if an unseen ceiling catches it. Wing beats of passing flyers, though, seem louder than they should be at this distance. There is a reason. The air has a different weight than the dry, cool morning of a modern coast. It holds vibration well. It grips feathers and membranes in a gentler way. A broad wing does not have to argue as much to stay up. It negotiates, and the sky says yes more often. Orthodox physics explains it plainly. Lift grows with air density and wing area and the square of speed. If the day runs warm, columns of rising air build over the stones and the dunes. If humidity is high, scent moves in sheets along the ground and pools near water. If the coastline is long and broken with headlands, wind must bend, climb, and curl, making ramps and cushions and eddies. A long wing, tuned to low speeds and wide turns, can follow those ramps almost indefinitely. There is debate at the edges. Some suggest the air column itself, averaged across seasons, might have been a little denser during certain Cretaceous intervals. Others counter that even if the composition matched ours, the geography and climate of this era would still favor soaring, vast warm shallows, long belts of coastal rock, inland prairies that heat early, and a sun path that pours energy into the surface for long months. We are left with converging answers that all guide us to the same truth. Flight was cheap here, cheap in energy, not in risk. The water tells a parallel story. On bright mornings, fish school tight near the surface, tracking moving light like a map of safety that keeps changing. Anything that breaks that mirror becomes a threat. The first sign is not a shadow, but a sound, a whispering cut, where a beak parts the skin of the lagoon. Ripples race outward, carrying news the school cannot afford to ignore. They turn. They stack. The tight knot explodes into streaks, then tightens again as if it could decide not to be many. For a winged hunter, these moments are opportunities you can plan for. Long glide paths link cliff to lagoon, lagoon to river mouth to open bay. You would chart them by feel. Leave the ledge when the heat under your feet says the first elevator is ready. Slide to the seam where cool breath from the water meets air lifting from stone. Angle along that border to rest on its quiet lift. Then dive, shallow and fast, to the glassy skin just long enough to take what you need before that skin closes again. No single movement is dramatic. The drama is in how little effort it all requires when done well. Listen again. You can hear lift. It has a voice thin but real, a higher shimmer where warm air rises through leaves, a low hush along the cliff face where wind runs up the wall, a faint hiss where air drops over a lip and thickens in the lee. Experienced wings sense these voices through touch rather than ear. Membrane and feather become instruments that record texture smooth, rough, sticky, slippery, and translate texture into choice. Standard paleoclimate models add a layer of context. Warmer average temperatures, greater seasonality in some regions, steadier warmth in others. Coastal belts of conifers throwing pollen into the air until the light itself seems thick. Pollen and dust load the lower sky, making the sun's edges fuzzy and turning the world into a soft focus painting at certain hours. That haze is not just sight. It is also smell, a long page of chemical notes that signal who is blooming, who is rotting, who is ready to be eaten. Not all frameworks are so tidy. On the speculative edge, you find talk of pressure domes, of regions where the weight of the sky varies enough to give flight a local discount. Others speak of wind that sings at specific frequencies above ridgelines, guiding migrants in ways we have barely learned to measure. Folklore from much later times gives those winds names, tricksters, shepherds, guardians that assign them motive. The names do not change the physics, but they remind us that living beings often behave as if the air has moods. And on days like this, you would agree, it does. Predator and prey both read the same script, but with opposite goals. Fish learn the shadows that mean danger and the angles that make them least visible from above. They hold under the surface film when the sun is high, retreat to darker channels when it is low. Flyers learn the moments when glare hides them better than distance would. A bow wave of scent reaches them before a bow wave of sound does. The first clue is enough. You would also feel risk. Downdrafts form where you expect lift, then cancel the math of a plan in a heartbeat. A gust strikes from the side and folds a wing at the wrong instant. A drought 100 miles inland makes fewer thermals here, because wind lines tie coasts to prairies in ways that do not show on any map. A master of this sky knows when to turn for home, not by the clock, but by the tone of the air on their face. As day lengthens, the chorus of insects softens, tucked back under leaves to avoid heat that even they cannot spend. The warm shawl of air grows warmer still. Across the bay, a headland throws a bright line where spray catches the sun. Flyers commute along that line as if it were a road painted on water. Each glide is measured. Each climb is thrift. Nothing wasted. Everything placed. So the question unfolds gently. If air, warmth, and weight work together to open lanes in the sky, who taught the first travelers to trust those lanes? And what will they do when the road bends? The answer waits not above, but on the atlas of the world itself. Lift your view until coastlines are maps and mountain chains look like scars that have nearly healed. The planet spreads out as a cracked mosaic, each plate sliding against its neighbors with a patience that only rock can keep. Shorelines buckle into long bays. Pale shoals ribbon the coasts where waves break over submerged ridges. Islands bead in strings like broken necklaces. From this height, you can see the routes the wind will take before the wind even feels like moving. Where land splits, water enters. Where water enters, life rearranges. An inland sea opens across a continent, turning grasslands into archipelago. An archipelago into a stairway of rest stops for anything with wings. Fresh cliffs appear where there was once only dirt, exposing ledges that make instant neighborhoods. Headlands thrust out into reliable breezes and convert stubborn wind into upward force. Straits pinch currents and squeeze nutrients to the surface. Upwelling zones shine, not with light, but with density, with food stacked vertically from bottom to top. This is how separation becomes connection. Breaking one land mass into two multiplies the number of coastal miles, and every mile of coast is a corridor. Air flowing over long runs of warm ground builds the engines that carry travelers between those corridors. A chain of islands is not an accident. It is a bridge with uneven steps, but steps all the same. For wings that can glide long and climb often, the bridge is enough. Geology lays out the pieces. Plates drift on the slow conveyor of the mantle. Rifts open like seams pulled by invisible hands. Mountain belts rise on the edges and then slump, leaving shelves that the sea redecorates with sand and shell. Orthodoxy sees a system powered by heat from within and cooled from above, one that cycles ocean basins in broad ages. When a basin is young, it is narrow and busy, with coasts close enough to throw wind back and forth. When a basin is old, it spreads and slows, and currents take grand circles that need larger wings to cross-dot in the age that concerns our story. The Western Interior Seaway slices a continent, a long, shallow ribbon that invites flyers to treat the heart of a land like a vast coast. The Tethys, warmer and older, speckles its margins with islands that promise landing strips every few dozen miles. New cliffs rise along youthful margins, soft chalk stacked in layers that hold ledges as if designed for nests. Entire generations learn the exact angle of approach for each porch in a neighborhood of white stone. Resource mapping becomes the quiet art that decides who thrives. Upwelling means fish. Headlands mean lift. New river mouths mean nutrients and silty shallows where prey has nowhere to hide. A clever lineage aligns its year with these calendars and treats wind like a partner rather than a wall. You would see regular paths emerge from what looks like chaos morning lanes that track angled light, afternoon loops that surf inland heat, evening corridors that ride the cool exhale of the sea. There are other maps, too. Some speculative voices talk of a growing earth, of expansion rather than drift, though most evidence draws us back to sliding plates and subducting slabs. Others claim long, stationary bands of storm that return to the same coastlines in multi-year cycles, carving aerial highways that only skilled migrants can hold in their heads. Later myths bend these features into the bodies of great beings. A dragon's spine becomes a mountain chain. A necklace becomes a chain of islands dropped by a hurried goddess. We label these stories as stories, but the shapes they cling to are real, and real shapes guide real wings. Follow a single traveler along one of these routes. Dawn. Launch from a chalk ledge while the first lift builds. Climb in wide circles until the water below is a gray mirror stitched with small ripples. Slide toward a headland that punches wind upward like a spring. Without a single hard flap, gain another 100 feet. Cross a gap of cool air in a shallow dive, letting speed become height again at the next warm face. By midday, reach a lagoon where fish gather in dazzling knots just behind a bar of sand. Feed, rest, preen. Then move inland on the day's strongest columns, too. Rookeries cut into new cliffs along a river's turn. Each step follows a logic written by rock and heat. Migration in this world is less a straight line than a braid. Groups split and rejoin along parallel lanes, driven by local weather and remembered edges. Youngsters learn these braids by following elders and by feeling with their own bodies. A single bad choice turning into sinking air, aiming for a headland that works only on wind with a different angle, can turn grace into struggle in a heartbeat. Skill is patience dressed as motion. In these new corridors, communities form where geology is generous. Ledge cities dot the chalk like star clusters. The white rock tells of ancient seas that once held micro creatures whose shells settled for ages, then hardened into stone soft enough to sculpt, but strong enough to hold. Every nest is a room with a view of weather, and weather is the original teacher. Airlines' true lanes of air are not fixed like roads, but certain geographies force them to recur. A tall ridge near a wide bay, a cape that faces the prevailing wind at a clean angle, a river mouth aligned with afternoon thermals from a hot interior plain. Where these features repeat along a route, travelers can live lives that look, from the outside, like rituals. They leave at the same time, pass the same markers, return along the same seams of lift. Ritual is simply a good idea repeated until the world changes under it, and the world does change. Rifts widen, coasts sag. A mountain range that once focused wind like a lens erodes and loses its power to bend the air. A delta pushes outward, moving a lagoon too far from the old cliff to make a day's commute affordable. Every corridor demands small edits every year. A lineage survives when it can notice those edits fast enough to keep the root alive. From up here, you can ask the quiet question that carries us forward. Among all these cracks and seams, which line barely a thread today, will grow into the next superhighway of the sky? Which newborn strait, which fresh headland, which unassuming chain of bars and keys will teach future wings a path they will pass to their young for 1,000,000 mornings? We will follow the answer down to the cliff to see who claims it first. Midday heat softens the edge of everything. The horizon wobbles like a slow wave. Cliff faces seem to breathe. Warm air climbs their flanks as if stone were exhaling. Dark rocks sparkle with salt spray, each crystal a small star in the bright. Below, long bands of foam stretch and fold. Above, the sky turns into a living staircase. You can sense the rungs without seeing them. A gull-sized shadow rises in a smooth spiral, then slides down range without a single beat, a ribbon of grace hung on nothing you can touch. This coast is a machine built from sun and stone. Where light pounds a headland, air warms and rises. Where water cools a bay, air sinks and flows outward low and slow. Between them lies a seam. That seam moves through the day, creeping with the sun, pushed by tide, bent by the curve of the cliff line. To wings that know, the seam is a road. The choreography is simple to say and hard to master. Glide, circle, climb. Drift across the seam. Glide again. Repeat until the day is done. Now lower your eyes to the water. Schools of small fish braid tight over sandbars. Current squeezes through a gap and throws bait into a bright knot. The knot lures hunters from below. It also calls to the hunters above. The best spots are where wind shear meets food, where the rising air from hot rock crosses the cool exhale of a bay, where a shallow reef throws up glitter and the sun paints targets near the skin. Every ledge becomes a launch ramp. Every notch in the cliff becomes a doorway for a silent dive. The quiet has its own pressure. When nothing moves, everything is listening. A wing's shadow passes. The beach stills. Crabs freeze mid-step, claws half open like tiny hands caught in a thought. Waders lower their heads and hold still, pretending to be driftwood. Silence has a shape here, long, flat, and tense. Hot stone breeds lift. Lift breeds hunters. Hunters pull a hush over the ground like a sheet. Orthodox science makes the rules plain. Air heated by rock becomes less dense and rises. Air cooled by water becomes heavier and slides outward. Where they meet, rolling tubes form, and those tubes can hold a glider aloft with almost no effort. The angle of the headland matters. The width of the bay matters. So do tides, because current changes where prey gathers and how the air smells. Warm kelp has a different signature from cold foam. A hungry traveler can follow those faint notes the way a sailor follows stars. Other views try to stretch the map further. Some propose that certain coasts create standing songs in the wind, repeating patterns of lift that return at the same hour on many days. Others chase the idea that ancient air, a touch heavier or warmer on average, widened the safety margin for big wings. Old stories told long after these shores changed speak of cliff spirits that hold up travelers with unseen hands. You and I know the hands are heat and shape. Still there's wisdom in the fable. The coast carries, and what it carries is everything that has learned to trust it. Risk is a fee that must be paid. A downdraft at the wrong moment turns a wing from feather to stone. A crosswind meeting a narrow cove can fold a membrane and dump its owner into chop. Thermals collapse without warning when a cloud slides in front of the sun. Birds, reptiles of the air, and first true birds share the same hard lesson. Lift is life until it isn't. Knowing when to turn away is as important as knowing how to climb. Watch a master work the route. From a chalk shelf, it leans into the upslope wind and lets the rock's breath raise it. At 20 body lengths, it begins a broad spiral, riding the center of the column where the air is smoothest. At the top, it noses out toward the seam between hot and cool, slides across it, and lets the cool air's weight turn height into speed. That speed carries it to the next headland, where the stone pulls it back up. The glide is not a straight line. It curves with the coast, always feeling for the richest part of the flow. The rhythm is like walking stairs you cannot see. Up one flight, cross a landing, up again. Below, the geometry of hunting is just as exact. Bait balls form where current hits a point and wraps, where sandbars break waves into glassy pools, where a brown river tongue carries insects and warmth into salt. Over each of those spots hangs a bubble of chance. The best flyers hover at the edge of that bubble, patient as stones, then tip, slice, and take what they need. Nothing is wasted. A skimming pass collects a single fish and becomes a climb before the splash has faded. Even the still parts of the coast move. Dunes creep in the wind, tall in the lee of shrubs, low where paths stay open. Each ridge rewrites the air above it. The smallest features matter. A gap wide as a doorway becomes an organ pipe for the wind, rich with tone that sensitive membranes can feel. A heat shimmer over a black boulder map points to a tiny elevator. Small things make the difference between effort and ease. As the day leans toward afternoon, the thermals fatten. The seam between water and land grows noisy with invisible eddies. More hunters arrive, drawn by a language the eye can't read. Wings stack at different heights in tight halos, each holding a ring in a living spiral. Newcomers slip into the circle. Veterans hold the heart. When one leaves to feed, another edges inward to take the empty space. It looks like grace. It is also physics practiced to a fine edge by bodies that cannot afford mistakes. Add the human part, the late-coming story we tell ourselves when we stand on a cliff and feel a push in the chest. We say the coast is generous. We say the wind has moods. We name the headlands and give them personalities, as if they were old friends with reliable habits. In truth, they are rock and shape and sunlight. Yet the names help us remember where the invisible ladders live. So we end on a soft question that opens the door to what comes next. In a world where the air builds moving architecture, who read those plans first? And what body carried the secrets farther than any other? A vast shadow ripples over green water. Below, the lagoon dims for a breath, then brightens as the owner of that shadow banks into the wind. The silhouette carries a tall crest, a blade of color that cuts the light. The wings look like long, curved sails. The glide is confident, unhurried, almost arrogant. It feels like the sky belongs to this shape, and has for a very long time. These are not dinosaurs, though they share the age. They are a separate empire. Their wings are not feathers, but membranes stretched between a long body and a finger that seems to go on forever. The fourth finger, lengthened into a spar. The membrane does not flap like cloth. It is alive. Fibers inside it hold tension, the way tendons hold a stance. Blood runs through it. Nerves taste the wind with a sensitivity no hand could match. Crests rise from skulls in many styles. Some are knives, some sails, some curled flags. They act as stabilizers, billboards, and perhaps in some kinds as mates' magnets. Mouths vary by diet. Toothy traps for fish, spear beaks for stabbing, blunt tips for crushing shell. Each form is a sentence about food, weather, and trade-offs. One lineage skims like a blade across calm water at dawn. Another drops from height in a clean plunge. Another launches from cliffs in a leap that seems to ignore gravity for the first 3 heartbeats. Set pieces fill their days. At first light, they line a sunlit ridge and warm until muscle speaks. One by one, they run 3 steps and lean into the air's hand. The first loop is always cautious, a test of the engine the day has set up. Then it grows easy. They hang where wind crosses the point. They drift along current lines that smell like fish. They skim shallow bays where scales flash like coins. In late light, they commute along warm coasts, clipping the scene where hot land breathes out and cool water breathes in. At dusk, they pack the ledges, a dark freeze against chalk and amber sky. The body says fragile, the life says strong. Bone walls are paper thin, yet the architecture inside looks like a truss bridge. Struts cross at angles, forming cages that resist bend and twist. The skull is light but long, balanced by that crest. The neck is a tower of vertebrae, built like stacked cups, flexible, yet steady. The chest is a keel for flight muscle. The shoulder is a clever joint that locks certain motions and frees others. Nothing extra, nothing wasted. Power hides in structure, not in bulk. Orthodox science sketches their rise in variety. Early forms small as crows. Later forms grand as small plains. Some stalked shorelines on knuckle-walking forelimbs, wings folded like a gentleman's coat. Others lived mostly aloft, landing only to rest, mate, and raise young. Eggs likely had soft shells. Young may have left the nest early, climbing air like kites with minds. Debate still sings around details. How much flapping, how much soaring, how warm the bodies ran, what the membranes were made of, how often they needed to feed. Even with questions, the broad image holds. Rulers of the open air for tens of millions of mornings, that other frameworks hum beneath the surface. Some suggest that certain crests are more than ornaments or fins, that they tune airflow and shift the center of pressure the way a sailmaker trims a rig. Others offer that these flyers use subtle color changes in the membrane to signal mood or health, color alive in the blood like a blush. Old myths, written in a time when humans finally walked along such coasts, paint storm serpents and sky dragons? Those names were never field notes, yet they fit the outline the bones provide. Long heads, wide wings, the sense that weather itself follows them. Watch one skim. The beak tip slices the surface like a knife through silk. Touch is so light that the water barely knows. A fish rises into harm's way, drawn by the line of pressure that the beak makes as it breaks the skin. The beak curves up. The fish vanishes. The wing rises an inch to keep the glide steady. Not a drop hits the eye. Then a second pass, then a third. Each time, as the angle to the wind changes, the crest pays for itself, trimming the glide just enough to keep the nose true. Risk never leaves. The parts that make such grace are vulnerable. A badly aimed gust folds the outer wing. A hard landing shatters a thin bone wall. A chick on a narrow ledge lives one wrong step from a fall. It will not survive. Weather is both ladder and trap. These kings know it. They test the air often, check the line between rock and wind with small moves, and back off when the tone is wrong. Communal life softens the edge. Rookeries cover chalk with guano-white terraces that shine from a distance. Calls bounce from wall to wall. Adults circle, holding station until a gust gifts them a window to land. Young beg, heads shaking, wings flickering in a drill they will repeat for years in grown form when they hold a thermal's heart. Fights happen. They are quick. A snap, a shove, a turn. Then stillness. The cliff returns to a rough peace. Human eyes would read signs here. Patterns of launch, patterns of return. Ledges that favor bold ones, ledges that favor the patient. We would give each niche a name. We would track the grand silhouettes and tell stories about their moods. Then we would learn that mood is weather, and weather is shape, and that to live here is to speak both. So the next question rises like a thermal over black basalt. What design lets these delicate bodies rule a sky this unruly, and what secret lies inside a wing that weighs almost nothing and holds almost everything? Pull in close. Inside the wing is a cathedral. Struts cross like ribs in a vaulted ceiling. Between them run slender tubes of bone filled with air. Light gleams on the inner walls as if the body had polished its own halls. Membrane anchors to the skeleton. Along a long finger, a spar that seems impossible until you feel how the struts share the load. Here, strength is not mass. It is geometry. The bones are pneumatic. Thin outer walls, lattice inside. Each cross brace stops a bend before it grows, the way a truss stops a bridge from sagging. Joints lock in one axis and roll in another. So, power goes where it should and never where it would cause harm. Tendons run like guy wires. They store energy when the wing flexes and return it when the wing straightens. turning motion into a kind of spring. Membrane fibers add their own order, crisscrossing to resist stretch in some directions and allow it in others. Tension over compression, net over beam. The body learned the same lessons that builders learn when they want to make large with little. Energy is the coin of life, and these flyers spend it with care. Soaring winds overflapping whenever the air allows. Glide ratios shift maps. A ridge 20 miles away is within reach if the wind holds. A lagoon that seems too far becomes a short hop if you climb 5 minutes longer on the current column. Body mass stays low so that air can do more of the work. Muscle sits where it counts most, in the chest and shoulders, and even there the fibers are tuned for endurance more than raw burst. Standard biomechanics puts numbers to beauty. Lift scales with area and speed and density. Drag grows with speed squared. The best plan is to keep speed moderate and area high. That means long spans, slender spars, big surface. At rest, folding becomes a puzzle the body solves with joints that tuck and two-way membranes that do not crease into weakness. On the ground, the arms become legs, the hand knuckle becomes a foot, and walking happens on forelimbs that were sails a moment before. Each mode is a compromise that works because the structure spreads stress across many parts. Compromise has a cost. Impact is the enemy. A wing that is perfect in air can be fragile when it hits a branch or a bad landing spot. A body that holds heat well in flight may lose it fast when wet or in cold wind. A life built on lift depends on places that give launch. No cliff, no ridge, no strong thermal? Then the morning belongs to others. Weather turns from friend to judge. A run of dull days can starve a master of the sky, and yet the design finds ways to hedge. Tendon locks can hold a glide with little muscle input, saving fuel. The membrane can shed water along grooves so drops do not cling. Vascular nets can warm thin tissues before motion, keeping flexibility when it counts. The crest may act as a trim tab, moving the center of pressure a touch forward or back for balance as loads shift. Every small fix adds up. Throw a dozen tiny advantages into the same body, and you get a shape that seems to cheat gravity without ever breaking the rules. Standard science reads the bones and the rock they sit in and tells a calm story of change across ages. Early forms test small spans. Later forms push to extremes, some walking well, others hardly able to move on flat ground, but perfect in air. The lineage tries many blueprints. Most fail. The ones that work become common, and then, after a time, rare again as the world edits the stage. Through it all, one theme holds. Subtract matter, add order. Whether does the math that counts most. A single perfect ledge can raise 10 seasons of young if wind arrives at kind angles and storms come slowly. One wrong gale hitting from a rare quarter can erase a generation in an hour. Gusts can pluck unready chicks like leaves. Sheets of rain can turn chalk to soap and wash nests away in quiet slides that nobody far off would notice. The wall keeps its secrets. It does not keep its oaths. Threats come from 2 directions at once. Below, egg thieves and nest raiders test the climb. They know the grooves that weak feet can still hold, the cracks where a claw can find a brief rest. Above, aerial raiders watch for that one moment when parents are both away. The answer is vigilance turned into architecture. Nests have lips of packed mud and woven sticks that keep young from rolling outward. Pebbles line hollows so eggs do not slide. Pathways are cleared and kept clear. Landing spots are chosen for their small ridges that catch a foot. Every detail says, "We were here before and learned the hard way." Orthodox science reads these cliff cities in the rock, record scratches from claws on soft chalk, streaks of phosphate that betray old guano, bands of pollen that date quiet years and loud years. It tells how colonies rise on new cliffs, fade when the sea undercuts the base, then bloom again a few kilometers along when a slab drops and opens fresh shelves. It tells how some lineages favor sun, others shade. Some prefer ledges near updraft cores, others ride calmer air at the edges where landing is easy. Fringe ideas color the edges. Some argue that certain crests and head shapes serve more to anchor and cross winds than to show rank, that a body is a key cut for a door that is really a gust. Others suggest that colonies shift in rhythms longer than weather, tracking slow changes in the scent of the forest as tree species wax and wane. Old myths from later coast peoples put it simply: the stone is alive and chooses whom to hold. Of course, stone does not choose. Yet from the ledge, held by toes and will, you could forgive anyone for thinking it does. Daily life is labor dressed as grace. Parents swap long flights for short ones, adjusting to the hour and the wind. One feeds, one guards. When both must leave, they do it between gusts, tight and fast. They return as a skill test every time. Approach too low and the updraft smashes you into the wall. Approach too high and you stall and fall behind the lip, then have to climb back and churn that beats even experts. The perfect approach is a flat line that kisses the seam where lift slides up the face. To watch landings on a busy evening is to see a school of living arrows find their marks. Again and again, the forest behind the cliff works in tandem. Clearings open when old trees fall. Sun reaches the floor. Low shrubs and herbs burst and seed, pulling insects in clouds. Foragers rise from ledges at dawn and cross these rooms as if crossing lakes, collecting what the day offers. The wind above the canopy can roar. Underneath, the air holds a steady hush, and flight becomes thread work. Branch to branch, shaft of light to shaft of light, each move measured against a maze. Meters matter. A nest 3 body lengths higher is safer from ground threats, but catches more crosswind. One tucked under a slight overhang dodges rain, but attracts damp and mold. Shade keeps chicks cool on hot days and steals precious warmth on cold ones. The best ledger families spread their risk across several shelves through kin and allies. If one ledge fails, another holds a cousin who can foster a chick through the week of bad weather. There is also the small economy of gifts. A neighbor who shares warning calls gets a spot in the circle when the thermal blooms above the wall. A chronic biter lands alone and leaves alone. Social rules grow out of wind and stone. They have teeth when the season grows tight. A colony that can hold itself together in rough weeks leaves more young. Over time, the temper of a wall takes shape in the bones of its people. From the beach you would hear layers, the low wash of surf, the leaf speech of the canopy, and above both the bright chorus from the terraces. At intervals a hush falls without a visible cause. Often the cause is a shadow, nothing more a pass from a raider high above, or just a large shape crossing the sun and triggering an old fear. The hush holds for 5 breaths, then life resumes, louder for having been paused. Precarious homes protect, and then without warning they betray. The line between safety and risk is as thin as a chalk lip. Every season is a vote cast by wind and rain that says yes, no, or not yet. In such a place, which wager wins across the long run, height, angle, timing, when all 3 change day by day? Where does a lineage bet when the house is the weather? In the dim under canopy, a spark zigzags from trunk to trunk. It is a body the size of a hand, clothed in a mosaic of soft veins. It slips through bands of leaf light like quick lightning. There is no sail here, no long finger holding a skin. There is a different plan, light bones, hot heart, arms turned to wings made of countless small blades that catch air and let go in pulses so fast the eye loses count. Feathers began as warmth and show. Down keeps heat in a small package. Filaments bloom for signal on arms and tails long before they fly. Over time those filaments branch and flatten. Veins lock along tiny hooks. A flat plane appears where there was fluff. Air meets that plane and gives back lift. What once wrapped the body now powers it forward. The same material that kept night at bay becomes a tool for moving through day. Shrinking bodies made this possible. A smaller frame needs less lift to rise, less food to feed, less runway to start. Higher metabolism pays the bill. Fast hearts, fast breaths, fast repairs. Heat is currency now. It cannot be wasted. Every gram bought back from bone and muscle is a gram that can be spent on range, speed, or safety. The price is hunger around the clock. The reward is access to rooms in the forest no one else can enter. Forests are not flat. They are mazes stacked in tiers. Low shrubs hum with beetles and leaf hoppers. Mid-level branches carry seed clusters and soft fruit. Upper arms sway in warm air where moths dance at dusk. The small wing finds roots through all 3. Branch to branch is a craft as precise as any sea hunt. A hop becomes a bound, becomes a glide. Claws land on bark at angles that would throw a heavy body off. Tail fans tilt to correct in a finger's width. The eye measures gaps that open and close as leaves breathe. This is flight as threading, not soaring. You would see new jobs appear on the stage. Insect gleaners move along bark, taking what crawls, not what swims. Seed pickers clear the floor of new growth and spread a forest's plan in their droppings. Nectar touchers test flowers and, without knowing it, write pollen on the next bloom's skin. Some small flyers raid from air to water's edge, flipping stones and grabbing larvae, then leap back into the green before a larger shadow can claim the space. There is competition in the sky now, but it is not a duel of equals. Membrane rules the open air above coasts and cliffs. Feathers rule the knots and corridors under the leaves. Thermal gliders drink the big wind. Flit and perch artists drink the little wind, the eddies that curl in the lee of branches, and the quick lifts that form above sunlit patches on the floor. One kind reads map-scale features. The other reads sentences written in leaf and twig. Watch a hunt unfold when both sides know the book. The ground hunter flares its nostrils and tastes the air. It does not chase. It drifts, keeping cover between itself and the herd. The herd edges toward a river bend where gravel bars open a wide gap. Overhead, a sentinel tightens its circle and then stations itself in a hole that costs almost nothing. When the first hooves touch the shallow, the hunter steps out, but only a step. Panic would scatter the herd back to safety. Press too soft, and they float away. Press too hard, and they split around you. Pressure is sculpted, not thrown at the same time. Birds in the spiral begin to call in short notes, spaced like beads on a string. These are not alarms for the herd. They are boundary lines for other wings. This is my ring. That is yours. Keep station. Leave a gap, and someone else will take it. Fill a gap at the wrong moment, and the whole structure tilts and fails. Air has lanes even when no roads exist. The result looks designed. It is not. It is practice, and practice is a kind of memory that lives in shared bodies. You would see it in how young animals move as if pulled by strings their elders hold. You would hear it in how calls soften when the danger is not close and harden when a new shape appears on the ridge. You would feel it in how the herd's curve becomes smooth under pressure, not jagged with panic. Old stories from hill tribes speak of sky judges that make notes on the ground. Cross the wrong field at the wrong hour, and the judges write your name in a spiral you cannot escape. The science speaks in calmer terms. Aerial predators take more where lift is easy. Prey shifts routes to reduce time under those lifts. Over years, those choices carve paths and resting sites in places a simple map would not suggest. The two sides design the landscape together without drawing a single line. Even plants join. Trees grow thicker in lanes that herds abandon, then throw deeper shade and break the thermal machine. Grasses thrive where hooves pass often, keeping the ground short and cooler, weakening lift further. Shade patterns change the air's behavior. The air's behavior changes roots. Roots change plant growth. The loop widens until the whole valley is a treaty written by heat, hooves, and wings. There are mistakes, and they are costly. A young watcher leaves its ring to chase a shimmer, and the pattern breaks. The herd finds a gap and pours through it. Or a nervous herd runs early, crowding into a side canyon where cliff faces focus wind and sends sentinels into a perfect hold. Then the ground hunter steps in at the exact bend that forces a choice between deep water and steep bank. One error in reading the sky, and the ground becomes the tightest room you have ever stood in. The most telling part is how the day sounds. From below, low grunts, hoof thuds turned soft by ferns, a splash, then a hush. From above, a soft whistle of air past feathers, reef calls, spaced wide like stones across a river. When it ends, either with a kill or with a clean escape, the sound changes at once. The spiral loosens. The herd's steps stop cutting the ferns and start brushing them. Even the river seems to breathe out. Ground terror sculpts the sky. The sky edits the ground. The bond is deep. If you were to remove the watchers, trails would run straighter for a while, then danger would pool in new places. If you remove the hunters, sentinels would drift for a season, then follow other edges, storm lines, insect swarms, fish runs. The system adjusts. But the imprint of the old dance would still lie underfoot in paths, in clearings, in the way trees lean. So ask the quiet question that opens the next page. How far down into daily life did vigilance from above sink its roots, into feeding times, into where young sleep, and what habits still carry that lesson even when the sky looks empty? The first sign is a line of white across the far horizon. Then the line grows towers. Heat anvils bloom, flat-topped and dark-bellied. Air smells of metal and wet dust. The sea shifts color from green to slate in a single gust. A wall of rain steps across the world and erases distance. Lightning stitches cloud to water with quick, jagged thread. The day becomes a room lit by flashes. Storms are a school with hard teachers. Cross winds strike the wing from the wrong side and fold a membrane that was a perfect sail a breath ago. Downdrafts slam altitude into the ground. Updrafts fling bodies above their plan, so fast the joints complain. Salt spray rises and gums the fine fibers of a flying surface, adding weight where weight cannot be spared. Every mistake costs more. Every success must be quiet, exact, and fast. Yet this is also when the coast fills the table. Wrecks wash in. Flooded flats trap fish that fed in brave water, and now wait in shallow bowls as the surge retreats. River mouths spill logs, insects, seeds, and stunned swimmers. The storm takes. The storm gives. Those who can work the edges eat very well. Skill sets split along weather lines. Some wings learn to surf the storm's skin. Stay on the shadowed side where the lift is smoothest. Let the big gusts slide under you like waves passing a boat. Keep the nose a touch high, and the speed just enough to keep control. Others ride lee-side glides, tucked behind a headland where the wind is forced up and over, creating a soft carpet on the backside. In that shelter you cross without fighting the punch. Scavenging becomes an art. After landfall, drift lines form a messy band of foam, weed, feather, and broken things. Food hides there, mixed with danger. Long beaks test without committing. Feet step lightly on logs that can roll. Eyes scan for wire-like threads of kelp that can snag and drown. There is also timing. Arrive too soon and the surf takes you. Arrive too late and the shore scavengers have made the streak of gifts into a bare line. Orthodox. Meteorology can forecast part of this dance. Organizing cells line up along sea breeze fronts. Gust fronts roll cold air head like a bulldozer and make temporary hills you can climb. Outflow boundaries write long, moving edges where lift can be found on one side and sink on the other. A flyer that knows these patterns saves fuel and risk. One that does not live on luck, and luck runs thin in wet wind, that old harbor tailies add rough charm. Never turn your back on a green squall. Never trust a lull that arrives before the main rain. Count between flash and crack to know how close the angry part is. The rules are simple for a reason. In storms, simple holds. There are body edits that serve in this class. Membranes with tighter fiber angles hold shape in gusts. Claws with a deeper curve grip wet ledges. Nostrils that can pinch, shut, keep spray from choking breath. Eyes with a second clear lid shed salt. Tendon locks rest tired muscles while the wing holds a fixed angle in a long, bumpy glide. Each trick is small. Put them together and the difference is the night and day line between a clean crossing and a hard landing you do not rise from. Training often happens at the storm edge, where the lesson is loud but not lethal. Youngsters follow elders around the corner of a headland and feel the air turn from steady to choppy in a single span. They learn to keep shoulders loose and hands, wings firm. They learn to look into gusts, not away. They learn the tone of rain that hides hail. They learn the color of water that holds a rip. Repetition writes the alphabet. One bad day writes grammar and scars. When the sky really breaks, there is no pride in staying aloft. Even the great ones sit it out. They pack onto leeward shelves, backs to the rock, heads down, wings wrapped. The cliff hums with the note of wind over mouths and cracks. Foam climbs the wall and hisses back down like snakes retreating. Hours pass. The lesson here is patience as survival gear dot. Then the rain slackens. The light shifts from steel to pewter. The first brave shape drops from the ledge, tests the air, and slides toward the new line of debris. Others follow. The work begins before the world is quiet. Flooded flats hold fish behind strands of grass that now act like nets. Puddles in rock bowls steam a little and draw insects in clouds. The first meal after a blow tastes like relief. Storms break wings and fill bellies. That is their strange truth. Any lineage that learns to use the edge, not the heart, of that violence writes its name into more seasons. The choice is not only in muscle, it is in calendar. Some nest earlier to avoid peak squall months. Some shift rookeries to walls that face away from the year's worst wind. Some grow a little heavier to hold shape better when gusts bully them. Every answer has a cost. Every cost must be paid in a currency the day can spare. We end with a soft, forward-looking line, the kind that asks for another hour of listening. Which lineage will master the storm's grammar so well that chaos becomes a tool, not a threat, and who, in the first crack of thunder on a hot afternoon, already knows the exact line to ride while the rest of the coast ducks for cover? Noon lands on the cliff like a torch. Sails brighten. Crests glow. Over the rock arenas, neon pennants flicker and fade as clouds pass, each flash a word in a language of light. On ledges stacked like theater seats, bodies turn to the sun and tilt just enough to throw color into the eyes of everyone watching. The wind brings the smell of salt and resin. The stone throws heat back into the air like a slow drumbeat. You would see 100 small stages running at once, a tilt here, a bow there, a spread of wing membrane so thin it shines like stained glass. Then a tidy fold as if the actor knows the scene is over. Color costs. To paint a crest takes chemistry. To hold a banner of skin high above the skull takes structure and fuel. The moment shines, but the bill runs all day. Why spend so much? Because a life can change in seconds on these terraces. Status trades for risk in every pose. The brighter flag claims center ledge first. The dimmer waits near the shadow. A mate sees a mark of strength, of health, of good feeding routes, memorized and kept. Futures are chosen between gusts. Orthodox science reads this display through simple rules. Honest signals are expensive. If you can afford to burn energy on size, you likely have surplus to feed a nest. If you can keep color deep through lean weeks, you likely hold a root others do not. Crest height, membrane gloss, even the crispness of a pattern along the edge, all of it whispers the same message. I eat well. I fly clean. I can pay the price of you and the young we will lift into this harsh air. When climates hold steady, the code works. When days slip out of tune, the code can fail. Here's the hard part. A crest can lie. A sudden windfall of food can make a poor root look rich for a season. A sheltered rookery can keep feathers perfect, even as skill declines. Some cheat with behavior, not pigment-stealing perches that throw extra light at the right hour, inflating colors reach without paying colors cost. In those years, mates choose futures written on a mirror, not on skin. Then weather corrects the record, and nests on the wrong ledges sit empty by midsummer. The stone remembers who read truth and who read shine. Predators learn these flags too. Brightness invites love and death with equal hunger. A crest held high against the sky draws attention from talons that circle just beyond comfort. A wing flashed wide to dazzle a rival is also a signal to anything with sharp eyes and a faster dive. Spectacle taxes the careless. On bad days, the best strategy is ugly fold small. Lower the head, be rock-colored. But status has its gravity. Many cannot step off the stage without paying in rank. On the fringes of theory live extra layers. Some suggest crests cool the head by spilling heat into wind, a radiator disguised as a flag. Others propose flow control that the banner trims the glide, shifting lift a finger's width forward or back for balance during sharp turns. If so, display is double duty, message and machine. Old Cliff Tailies, born long after these bodies left the stone, said the kings of air wore crowns that hummed when storms were near, a warning passed from bone to nerve. The bones we dig speak only their quiet truth, long ridges, thin plates, smooth spines, each evolved shape repeating across cousins as if a family secret were learned and kept. Watch a duel without contact. Two rivals stand 3 body lengths apart on a sunlit step. Wind tugs their crests into bright arcs. They raise, lower, tilt. The rhythm spikes. A short rush, then a stop so clean the ledge hums. Neither touches the other. Still, one will fold first and slide down a level, conceding the better doorway to the sea. The winner holds still, as if to say the choice was obvious all along. Below, a row of young heads trembles in a single motion as the colonies' pulse realigns to the new order. Energy spent on show has to be earned back. That pushes roots outward. The most gilded heads leave the rock first after dawn, ride the fat thermals hardest, and cut the best corners around the headlands to reach glimmering bait lines before they thin. Beauty buys dominance, but dominance raises the baseline. If you claim the finest stage, you must feed the image, or the image eats you. The bill comes due in muscle, in range, in risk. Weather edits the code. In bright, stable years, the palate runs hot. Banners grow tall. In foggy summers, muted tones win because muted bodies land better and spook less. After storms rub pigment thin and tear membranes, honesty returns by force. Only those with good engines glow. The young watch and the young learn. They grow into the shapes that match the average year they survived, not the loudest year they saw. Even the rock plays a part. Chalk amplifies color. Basalt swallows it. A wall facing noon burns brightness into eyes. A wall in soft morning makes small gestures look sacred. Colonies shift as leaders learn which theaters favor their script. On a pale cliff with clear sky, the luminous wind. On a dark wall under broken clouds, the steady wind. Two worlds separated by a headland teach the same species two different languages of shine. You would hear it in the sound as well. Display calls are short, clean, and carry far. They ride up drafts like notes on strings. They stop on a breath when a shadow cuts the sun. The silence is hard-edged, absolute. Then the noise returns with a laugh in it, nervous and proud at once. The way crowds in any age sound when power shifts before their eyes dot. So the riddle at the heart of noon becomes a soft, open question. As seasons slip out of tune hot, then cold, then a string of wet summers that never warm enough. Do these flags still speak truth? Or does the language of color turn into a trap that chooses the wrong winners and invites the cliff to thin its own ranks? When light itself lies, who teaches the next brood what to trust? A shadow the size of a small plain flows over rippling prairie. Herds freeze. Even lizards as heavy as cattle pause mid-step, eyes turned skyward. Above them, a span of membrane holds in perfect curve. The body at its center hardly moves. Heat from the flats lifts the giant without complaint. With each slow bank, the land below tilts like a map in a careful hand. Here the puzzle is scale. How do you hang so much life from air this thin? Wing loading a measure of weight per area must stay low or you fall. The answer is reach, a span so long that each square of skin earns its keep. Tendons stiffen the leading edge like a cable in a bridge. Joints lock when needed, so each gust does not demand fresh muscle. Launch is the hardest part. On flats, the giant uses a 4-limb vault, a quad launch from knuckles that turn stored spring into instant height. On cliffs, it is simpler: lean, drop, turn, and let the wall do the work. Daily range makes the world small. A single morning can take a giant across a basin and back if the sun keeps its promise. Cliff to plain, plain to lagoon, lagoon to ridge commutes, stitched by dawn thermals like beads on a string. Leave when the first warm columns bloom. Arrive at the feeding line when fish are high and rivals are still climbing. Then return, bellies full, on the last lift of late day, counting on the cliff's breath to place you back on your ledge in one clean slide. Orthodox physics sets the limits. Membranes must not flutter at flight speeds. Bones must not buckle under load. Muscles must not starve for oxygen in long holds. The line between possible and not possible is thin and sharp. Yet for millions of years these colossi lived on that line without falling off it. Rules of size bent, but did not break. The trick was not one trick. It was a stack of small wins, hollow bone without weakness, tendons that store energy, a chest that feeds muscle efficiently, a brain tuned to the textures of air. Fringe ideas push the envelope further. Some argue the air was a touch more forgiving in certain places, warmer seams of climate that widened, lift, and softened stalls. Others suggest the giants exploited strong, reliable wind lanes along ancient coasts, riding predictable rivers of air like ships hugging currents. There are even old myths from much later peoples, stories of sky whales that swam in invisible seas. Those tales are poetry, yet their shapes echo this truth. The sky has channels, and the largest riders learned them first. Watch launch on level ground. The hardest act these bodies perform. The giant crouches, wings half folded. Forelimbs dig. In a single powerful bound, it vaults upward, throwing weight over air that already rises from warm soil. Wings open at just the right moment, not early, when drag would pull it down, not late, when a knee would hit earth again. The first glide is shallow, the second wider. By the third circle, the big body floats with a calm that looks like peace but is really skill, riding a knife edge. If people had stood beneath those skies, we would have named every wind. The cliff breath that pushes up slope at noon. The sea's exhale that slips inland after dusk. The knife-edge gust that arrives ahead of rain with the scent of iron. We would have read omens in silhouettes, the way sailors read phone lines. A crest angled a certain way above the headland. Good fishing on the flood. A dark ring of flyers high over the marsh. Keep children close, the ground hunters are moving. Our rites would have tied themselves to migrations that did not include us festivals at first arrival, quiet days at last departure, blessings spoken toward the runway of the wind. Nature had already written the symbols. Dragons, sky snakes, storm kites, figures that live in so many cultures feel less like inventions and more like translations. Long heads with banners, membranes that glow when backlit, spirals that hang above the valley without falling. These shapes ask for stories even where there are none to carry them. Bones found much later in chalk cliffs sparked tales that felt like memory, and perhaps that is the most curious part. How can a mind build myths for a sky it never saw? Orthodox science answers with quiet reasoning. Our brains are pattern machines. Give them a strong outline wing, crest, glide, and they echo it in art and story across centuries. Fossils lend hard edges to soft ideas. Weather adds rhythm. The rest is human craft. Yet some thinkers walk wider paths. They suggest that shared dreams ride on deeper currents. Inherited fears of shadows above the plain. Love for the clean curve of a glide that wastes nothing. Reverence for power that moves without sound. Old coastal families once said the cliff itself sings through blood. No instrument measures that. Still, many of us know the feeling of standing on a ridge and sensing a rule we cannot write down. Myths would have served as field guides and guardrails. A tale of a storm-bearer that must be greeted before boats leave the cove, practical advice folded in a story coat. A song that names the safe ledges in order, easy to teach to children who cannot yet read a map. A carved crest on a mast to honor the unseen ladders that lift sailcloth as surely as they lifted wings. Where science builds models, culture builds memory. Under skies like those, memory would have worn feathers and crests, because that is what the weather wore. There would have been fear, and it would have been clean. Not dread of darkness for darkness's sake, but the sharp caution that keeps a fisher from launching when gust fronts show their gray veils. That keeps a herder under trees when the spiral tightens above the ford. Stories make that caution portable. When the long banner faces east, wait for the second bell of wind. A sentence like that outlives the person who first spoke it. It outlives the ledge, even, when the sea finally undercuts it and turns a city of nests into a white fall, and there would have been praise. The way we thank tools for doing what hands cannot, we would have thanked the air for lifting bodies so lightly, thanked rock for finding the shape that turns wind into a stair, thanked water for laying silver pages of bait where a skimmer can reach them. Gratitude, too, becomes a map. It points back to the causes we should protect. The forest that breathes the humidity, that feeds the cloud, that makes the lift, that brings the flyers, that bring the stories. Listen to the camp as the thunder walks closer. Voices lower. The old ones point at the light lines above the ridge and use smaller words than usual, not out of fear, but respect. A child leans back to follow a crest that glows electric for a heartbeat before the dark folds over it again. No one claims the sky. No one pretends to own the river. The world, for a moment, is a room with very high ceilings, and everyone knows their chair. What remains strange is the way these skies feel familiar even to those of us who never saw them. We look at a long jaw with a banner and think of kings. We see a spiral held in place and think of watchmen. We stand under clouds shaped like anvils and wait for music. Perhaps this is just the mind's love for symmetry, forms that balance, arcs that close. Perhaps it is something else, a memory passed not in stories but in the body's quiet math, the way hearts slow when a glide is perfect, because perfection needs stillness to be heard. So let the last line drift like smoke toward the high dark. Why do these ancient skies feel strangely remembered inside us? What echo survived without witness? And what is it asking us to notice now? The change begins where few would look for it. Winters extend by heartbeats. Fog keeps mornings longer. Return flights arrive a day late, then two. On the rookery wall, silence lengthens between calls. It's the kind of shift that slips past a single season's memory. Only the ledge itself, stained in layers of years, can compare the present to the past without blinking. Thermals answer first. They rise a little weaker, a little later. A giant on a sunlit step tests the air with an open mouth and half-raised wings, then sets them down again. Another tries, gains height too slowly, and spends what should have been saved for distance. A few more minutes and the column fattens, but those are minutes stolen from the feeding line, where bait is a tide written in seconds. A small subtraction from lift becomes a large subtraction from meals. Windows narrow elsewhere too. Insect hatches slide on the calendar. The soft rain that once shook seeds loose on cue now comes late, or not at all. Shorelines move from one storm, then another. Food peaks and hatch dates fall out of step, and the bellies that need filling when beaks open are met with a thinner table. The math is not dramatic. It is unjust only in how quiet it is. Behavior edits itself as the world leans. Routes shorten. Parents choose closer, poorer grounds because farther, richer ones cannot be reached on time. Clutch sizes dip. Risky hunts creep into odd hours noon over glassy water when heat still bites. Midnight over mud when scents tell more lies than truth. These are not grand tragedies. They are compromises paid in small coins until the purse feels light. Thresholds hide until they don't. A degree or two of average cool means the morning elevator misses 3 days in a row, then a week. Adults lose weight. One windy spring strips crests to gray. Color will return, but not fully. The colony holds. Another late season follows, and the thin ones do not return. A series of almosts becomes a never. Outsiders ask what happened. The wall remembers 100 small answers. Orthodox climate tells a calm story. Slight orbital shifts change how sunlight is distributed. Currents wobble. Storms find different tracks. The mosaic of lift and food redraws itself without raising its voice. The effects compound. No single number screams. Together they make a choir that leads old rhythms away. Some researchers point to ice far from these coasts, growing at margins and changing the wind that reaches warm seas. Others trace subtle chemistry in the air that adjusts how high clouds form, shading cliffs an hour more each day. Small levers move big rooms. Fringe thought adds its own colors. Some suggest volcanic veils that return every few decades, thinning light just enough to stretch bad years into bad decades. Others speak of deep ocean pulses that surface on long cycles, lifting nutrients for a time and then leaving deserts of blue. Old stories remember ages called the lean sun, when days felt shorter though clocks did not change. The names are imprecise. The mood is right. On the wall, wisdom collects in habit. Experienced pairs shift nests to ledges with better morning aspects. They teach young to launch later, to save strength, to refuse flights that feel wrong even when hunger insists. Patience becomes a tool, not a luxury. But patience runs against the stomach's drum. Some will push when the air says no. A few will not return. You would notice the sound change. In fat years the rookery buzzes. In thin ones the music has gaps. Calls that once overlapped now leave spaces where single breaths stand alone. The cliff is still busy, still fierce, still honest. It is simply quieter. Even the surf seems to pause longer between phrases, as if listening for something that will not arrive. Not every species fares equally. Small, hot hearts down in the forest can adjust faster, swapping diets and routes in weeks. Membrane lords at the margin of physics have less cushion. Their designs are perfect for a narrow slice of conditions. When the slice moves, perfection becomes a cage. The very traits that kept them aloft for ages, the subtraction of mass, the reliance on columns born of sun now, bind them to a world that is slowly leaving. Loss wears patient shoes. First the bright crests look a little dull. Then the evening rings above the headland hold fewer bodies. Then one spring the old ledge has no white stains at all. A traveler might think the colony moved. The wall knows some did and some did not. The chalk keeps its own museum of absences. The strange truth is that this is not punishment. The world is not angry. It is turning a page as it always has, quietly, in a language of temperature, timing, and wind. The hurt comes from the intimacy of that language. To watch a master of the sky press into dead air, to see it fold and try again, is to feel how close grace lives to gravity. Every life here balanced on subtleties. Subtlety stepped backward dot. So listen for the final, careful question this chapter asks. Which whisper proved loudest in the end? Was it the one that cooled the stone and delayed the morning ladder? The one that shifted the hatch and moved the table an hour out of reach? Or the one that redirected wind so that spirals grew ragged and tired? If you can answer that, you can follow the story into the chapter no one wished to write. It begins as a new star over a low horizon. The glow swells until the air itself seems to ring. Shadows arrive before sound. Then the world is all sound one long, body-deep note that shakes the bones of the cliff and makes the sea forget its rhythm. For a heartbeat, the light is larger than day. Then noon becomes cinder. The bright turns black. Ash rises in pillars and spreads until it is no longer an event but the weather. Sunlight throttles. Thermals die. The great engines that lifted bodies like prayers fall silent. Wings that made distance from almost nothing now need fuel they cannot find. The mirror of the lagoon loses its gleam and turns to a dark skin that hides no bait. Above, the rings that held sentinels in calm layers collapse. Even navigation loses its rules. Landmarks vanish under gray sheets. The horizon blurs into the sky, and the sky into the ground. Food chains snap, not like ropes, but like nets cut in many places at once. Plankton dim out at the surface. Small fish hesitate, and then fall deeper. Bigger fish chase them into water that is colder than any muscle can tolerate for long. In the forest, insects disappear from the lightless understory and leave small flyers tapping empty leaves. Seeds wait in cones that do not open because heat no longer visits. The base has left the room. The apex finds itself seated at an empty table. Survival rearranges itself in an hour. Ground huddles, pressing warm bodies together in the last pockets where stone holds summer. Cliff ledges go silent. Parents sit on nests that will never hatch, as if weight and will could keep a world turning. Scavengers inherit a terrible feast. Bodies that could not launch, bodies that landed hard. They do not celebrate. They eat because the night has no end they can predict. The sea speaks in new vowels. Rain tastes of bitter stone. Rivers run dark. Storms form along ash lines and carry cold far into places that should be warm. Each law of the air is revised. Up is no longer a stair. It is an effort without reward. The careful bargains that made grace possible, heat for lift, light for food, rhythm for root, are all called off at once. Orthodox geology names the cause in clean syllables: impact, ejecta, aerosols, sulfate veils, global dimming. Orthodoxy also counts the toll, species by species, coast by coast. But numbers cannot hold the silence of an empty rookery wall, the dead weight of air that will not rise, the stubborn habit in a body that stands on a ledge at dawn and waits for a wind that never comes. That is the human part of the story, standing in a doorway that no longer opens, and learning how long stubbornness can stand without hope. Fringe thought reaches for other layers. Some speak of firestorms that created their own winds, cyclones lit from within, luring flyers into traps that looked like salvation. Others describe skies filled with lightning for days, charge finding charge in dust and ash until the planet crackled. Old myths from much later times remember the year the sun forgot its path, and the rain that stung. The phrases are childish and exact. Time slows. Long nights become long seasons. Cold summers follow. Acid rains fall and take the first fragile greens that tried to return. A rookery that held 10,000 voices last year holds 10 this year, and none the next. On a few walls and a few corners, life holds by fingernails that do not look like fingernails at all. Small, hot bodies that breed fast, eat anything, and accept poor air as a temporary room. Feathered cousins that shrink roots to match the new physics. Little reptile hearts that throb slowly in warm caverns while the sky relearns its color. The rulers of air were betrayed by the very ladder that crowned them. When air ceases to act like air, to rise when heated, to carry scent, to blue at noon, To bend light across water in ways a hunter can read skill has nowhere to land. There is grace in that truth, hard and clean. No arrogance, only a mismatch between tool and room that arrived too fast to repair. Stand for a final moment with a survivor under a low overhang. The ash falls like fine snow. Each flake is a memory of a world melted to powder. Breath is a choice. Movement is a calculation. Somewhere deep in soil, seeds hold the plan for the next chapter. Somewhere in shallow tide pools, algae test what little light comes through and answer with the first faint green. The book is scorched. It is not burned through. The last line is also a beginning. When air stops being air, who can still afford to breathe? Not the largest, not the most beautiful. Those who need least, spend least, and bend fastest. Those who can turn a bad day into a week into a season into a first spring under a smaller sun. And when the sky remembers its blue, who will be waiting at the mouth of the burrow, eyes half closed against new light, ready to step out and teach the wind a different set of rules? Hold the scene steady. Small forms hop among charred stems, leaving soft prints in powder. When they shake, soot lifts from feathers like dark snow and drifts back to the ground in lazy spirals. The air smells of wet ash and pine pitch. A low wind slips through blackened trunks and makes a sound like distant surf, as if the forest still remembers how to breathe. Under the soot, green points push up first shoots, testing a light that has returned thin but honest. On a fallen log, a tiny bill pecks, pauses, pecks again. Work begins with no speech, just hunger, heat, and habit. These lives did not start here. Their tools were forged long before the fall. High metabolism, the furnace that runs hot in a small chest. Rapid breathing, a hedge against bad seasons. Flexible diets, a list of foods so long that something on it is almost always near. Nests that can be tucked anywhere, ground, shrub, hole, ledge, reed architecture that travels light. These are heirloom traits, passed down not as stories, but as muscle memory. When the sky forgot itself, the tools remembered. Roots forward appear in patches. Shrublands replace forests where crowns burned and did not return, at least not yet. Low growth spreads like a quilt of green across gray. New insects test these rooms, soft-bodied and easy to catch. Seeds from tough plants flicker across the ground after short rains, and small bills learn their shapes in a week. The first cycles are trial and error, roots drawn, erased, drawn again. A valley that fed well last month fails this one. A ridge that was bare now shines with herb tips and beetle backs. Every adjustment writes a line in a notebook nobody holds, but everyone reads. Watch how they use the hours. Dawn is warm enough to move, but not yet hot enough to thin the small store of water they carry inside. Midday sends them to shade under logs and cracks, within tangles of living fence, as if the whole world has agreed to hold its breath for a while. Dusk opens the floor again to a quiet search. A step, a listen, a pluck. A hop, a freeze, a dart. Day after day, the loop tightens into a rhythm that fits this new room. Echoes of elders ride inside these small bodies. Long glides become brief flutters between shrubs. The habit of reading lift survives as a knack for catching tiny eddies over sun-warmed stones. Vigilance persists not the high circling of sentinels, but the quick, precise stillness that makes a shadow pass without a sound. Songs map the rebuilt world. They label water in notes, mark safe routes and phrases that repeat like trail blazes. A thin trill means berry patch on the slope. A two-note call means hawk road above the ridge cross low. Music becomes a ledger of what works. Orthodox biology explains the advantage with simple arithmetic. Smaller bodies need less food to maintain life. Shorter generation times turn lessons into lineage faster. Varied diets make famine rarer. Heat is the coin, and these coin purses are efficient. Even so, the math by itself does not catch the mood of this hour, the stubborn grace with which a ruined valley turns into a pantry. One sprig at a time, edges of thought add other colors. Some field workers whisper that survivors carry more than instinct, that they hold faint echoes of old sky rules, as if memory can reach across eras through blood. Others tell of places where birds fly routes that mirror vanished coastlines, as though wind still wears fossil paths. Folklore from later human camps will claim that the forest taught its lessons to anyone who slept in it and woke with ash on the tongue. Whether poetry or fact, the effect looks the same. Behavior that fits rooms that no teacher alive has walked before. There is a craft to nest-making now. In a stump's split heart, fibers are pulled into a bowl, each strand placed to keep water from pooling when the brief rains pass overhead. In a thorny shrub, a cradle hangs where claws struggle to reach. On a low ledge of raw chalk, a neat cup clings behind a lip of stone safe from splash. Each site is a theory about weather written in grass and hair. Some theories fail. Those notes are not kept. The ones that hold are copied, and soon whole neighborhoods echo with the same design. Predators change their lesson plans too. With fewer large bodies moving through, silence has a different weight. Snakes test the new corridors between shrubs. Small mammals learn the same routes and then learn how to avoid them. Overhead, the few raptors that persisted patrol at strange hours, cutting across the old evening lines, as if the sky's clock were broken and time could only be felt by the touch of air on the face. The answer below is steady. Stay near the lacework of cover. Keep the distance between shadows shorter than the length of a dive. Food webs form around items nobody would have praised in the old days. Carrion beetles, seed heads from plants too plain to name. Algae that coats rock bowls after 2 nights of fog. A chick raised on such fare will not grow into a giant. It will grow into a parent who knows where to find this plain wealth again, and that is enough. Life often restarts on meals that rarely make songs. Listen closely, and the land speaks in new vowels. The brittle tap of beaks on charred bark where hidden larvae live. The soft tear of grass blades woven into nests. The shaken rattle of dry seed pods as small feet pass. The sudden, bright run of a stream under ash, sounding like glass beads poured into a shallow dish. These notes are not loud, but they are many, and together they make a hymn to persistence. Whiteness outlives largeness. The line feels tidy until you stand under a sky that once wore kings and now holds only the quiet grace of small flights between shrubs. Then the line feels like a duty, to learn what lightness knows and carry it forward. The elders, the true elders, those who rode anvils and skimmed green water, are gone. Their habits survive as edits in the behavior of the tiny. Don't waste the cool hour. Trust the seam where shade meets sun. Read the ground before you read the distance. These are old rules in new clothes. As seasons stack, the green spreads. Shrubs become young trees. Insects diversify. Seeds vary. Songs multiply to match. A map reappears that is not the old map, but it holds the old logic. Corridors and rooms, none owned, all borrowed. And if you tilt your head and half close your eyes at dusk, you can almost see a long glide where only short hops exist, a ghost of air law still, working under new terms. So the question at the door of this chapter floats in like dust through late light, which ancient habits kept breathing when the sky forgot itself. What small motions, practiced 1,000,000 times in quiet, carried flame through the long dark so morning could find it again? Evening settles on a modern valley and turns concrete warm and gentle. Swallows stitch the air above a parking lot, looping and threading as if the lines on asphalt were guidance from an older hand. Across the way, a pair of raptors rides a column that rises from the sunlit face of a glass tower. Their shadows cross lanes of traffic and then slide across a sound wall grown with ivy. Far off, cliffs ring with familiar cries, though the ledges now share their skyline with antennas and crane arms. Old rules work under new roofs. Continuities hide in plain sight. Thermals bloom above dark surfaces, slate roofs, fresh pavement, south-facing brick. They form at the same hours they always did, fattening when the sun stands high, easing when it leans. Birds that once launched from chalk ridges now lift from heat pooling over stadiums and rail yards. The geometry has changed. The grammar has not. Up is still where warm meets cool. Hold is still found in the seam between them. Rookeries find strange addresses. Office ledges become cliffs at scale. Nests tuck into recesses designed for window washers, the guano white signatures as old as chalk. Bridges offer undersides that mimic overhangs. Their iron ribs turn crosswinds into steady lanes for approach and departure. The city hums its own weather, and wings answer with old habits tuned to fresh acoustics, corridors for travel shadow vanished coasts. Look at maps of bird migration, then lay them over ghost shorelines drawn by geologists. Lines often rhyme. The reason is not magic. It is wind. Where seas once breathed, the land still preserves slight slopes, low passes, and temperature patterns that shape air in ways that matter to muscle. A flock crosses a plain at dusk along a route that makes no sense to the eye, then passes above a line of fossil dunes the map forgot to draw. Air remembers what rock tries to hide. Clues are scattered everywhere. A feather caught in a fence tells molting schedule, diet, traces, even pollution records if you ask it with the right instruments. Wind at a street corner curls in a way that explains why certain swifts always take the same turn, even when traffic shouts. A rock face above a reservoir records years of spray as bands. Each band a diary of wet seasons and dry a ledger for how often the thermal engine switched on in time for the evening show. Old laws whisper under new noise. A bus roars and shakes windows. A kestrel hangs in the slipstream for a breath, using the pressure wave like a tiny ridge lift. A rooftop garden cools just enough to change a building's plume. The local pair times arrival to match that minute and lands flatter, safer. A river, straightened into a channel, still exerts a pull on night air. Fog forms along it on certain autumn mornings, just thick enough to sharpen scent trails for the small hunters who work its banks. Orthodox research writes these patterns down with sensors and math. Thermal imagery shows hot squares blooming over parking lots at noon. GPS tags draw ribbons of movement that hug rail embankments and canal paths. Stable isotopes and feathers reveal the exact latitude band where a bird fed 2 months ago. The data stack into a story that feels both modern and ancient at once. Life reads the city the way it read the coast by texture, by warmth, by edges. Wilder thought edges close. Some urban naturalists swear certain streets sing at particular hours, the wind turning corners in notes that regulars can feel in their jaws, the way old pilots felt lift in their teeth. Others keep lists of high windows where swifts knock every spring, as if a memory older than brick taps politely to be let in. Folklore moves in too, small and local. A grandmother says the long-tailed hawk shows up when the rain smell arrives on the first hot day. The grandchildren learn to look up, and years later they find the rule works often enough to pass on. Rock still keeps the master diary. In canyons and quarries you can walk past pages of ancient weather. Crossbeds and sandstone record winds that set dunes moving long before any highway did. Chalk cliffs hum in afternoon sun and give off the same low heat that fed rookery walls deep in time. If you touch them at dusk, the warmth sits just under the skin of stone like a heartbeat. You do not have to know the chapter to feel the continuity. Heat rising, wind answering, wings arriving. The invitation is simple. Listen. Watch how a swallow picks up speed in the lee of a warehouse, then brake without fuss when the airstream thickens over a warm loading dock. Watch how a hawk uses the face of a courthouse like a slope of basalt, gaining 20 feet with the tip of the wrist. Collect a feather from the verge and let its barbs slide back into place after a gentle rub. That tiny act repeats a ritual millions of hands long, the maintenance of flight with care and oil and time. Rules of vanished kings haunt present weather. A spiral over a suburban mall looks, from the right angle, like the same halo that once hung above a headland. A narrow flock stitching a river at dusk writes the same sentence once written over a seaway. Even our machines show respect without meaning to. Turbines turn to face wind. Planes wait for lift to thicken before rotation. Tower cranes hum and flex with gusts in ways that echo crests humming on old ridges before a storm. If we learn the grammar, the city becomes a tutorial. Heat nouns, wind verbs, ledge adjectives. We begin to read forecasts not just as icons, but as maps of likely lift and sink. We notice that the corner near the bakery always smells rich on damp mornings and draws insects that draw birds that draw eyes that draw stories. We tape the loose bit of gutter because a nesting pair uses it as a perch, and we like being part of the sentence, even if only as punctuation. Follow this thread, and it runs forward. What else will the air confess once you know how to listen? Perhaps the timing of future droughts hidden in tree rings waiting in park stumps. Perhaps the early steps of a new migration carved by warmed lakes that throw nightly plumes over neighborhoods not yet built. Perhaps a warning written in weaker thermals that tells big travelers to shorten plans before hunger makes the suggestion. Cruel swallows stitch the evening. Raptors ride a column born from old sunlight, caught in new glass. A cliff natural or made rings with voices that would be familiar to ears centuries gone. Wind lifts the last warmth from pavement and carries it upward, offering a stair you cannot see to anyone light and ready. The lesson is the same as it was when chalk shone and crests burned bright. Pay attention to the small forces, and the big picture reveals itself dot. So we end with a final glide, unhurried and open. If we learn to read wind and stone, feather and ledge, data and tail, what other lost laws will the air confess? Perhaps the ones that do not only recall the past, but sketch the first lines of our own weather to come?